Radio TV Phono Nut here, and today's project is this Philco console. The reason I'm holding it up is because the cabinet is trashed and it won't even sit up on its own. I basically bought this for parts, and we may try to resurrect the chassis, as in do just enough to it to make it play. Here's the chassis. As you can see, it's kind of rusty, as is the speaker. We can tell that one of the IF cans has been replaced. You can see the square one there. The original one would have been round. Okay, this is a model 3862, which would make it from 1938. And this looks to be an entry-level model, but still likely a decent performing radio in its day. Looks like the chassis and speaker that you would normally see in a Tombstone style cabinet, stuck in a console. Here's the bottom rear brace for the cabinet. As you can see, it's chewed up pretty bad. Looks like it's possibly been sitting in water, and also looks like it may have some termite damage. I mean, yeah, this cabinet could be fixed if somebody was really good with woodworking, but I'm not really good with woodworking, and I don't want to spend $500 to restore the cabinet of a common Philco radio. So this one's going to get the chassis yanked, and the cabinet's going to go on the garbage heap. And as you can see, this whole section is completely gone, disintegrated. Alright, here's the chassis, and as you can see, it's fairly rusty. The speaker has a rip in the cone that could be fixed, and also, no surprise, there's a lot of crap in the air gap. Right, looking under the chassis, we can tell the power cord has been replaced. I know that's not from 1938. I see an electrolytic here that's been tacked in with a camera that won't focus, but it has a 1965 date code on it, so we know the radio was used up until at least that point. We have these two capacitors that have been hacked in. Those look like the line to chassis capacitors, one from each side of the AC line to chassis. Those are guaranteed to be leaky by now. And of course this IF transformer that was replaced. But yeah, if the rest of the radio looked as decent as the underside of the chassis, we might have saved it, but no such luck. Alright, the tuning condenser works, but the controls pots are frozen solid. Looks like one is for the band switch and the other is off on volume. And this volume control shaft is frozen solid. I can't even penetrate it with the vice grips. The band switch, I'm not worried about it as long as it's set to the standard broadcast position. We should be okay. And that band switch is really rusted. Volume control is not far behind. I remember years ago giving a friend a Philco table model that was in about the same condition as this set, and the controls were frozen, and I think he told me that he had to use a torch to get those controls hot enough to break them free. Well, I don't even own a torch, and I'm not going to go to that much trouble, so if it comes to that, I'll just jump the power switch on and jump out the volume control with a couple of fixed resistors to get it to about the halfway point and let it go at that, because like I said, this is only going to be a resurrection if we even make it that far. And I really wouldn't be surprised if this set plays. I've ran up on situations like that before. I find an old crusty radio that looks like it's been neglected for the past 50 years, and the chassis fires up and plays without a lot of effort, but you find a nice looking old radio that's been sitting in the same spot in Grandma's living room for the past 60 years, and 60, 70, 80 years, however old the set is, and that one will have everything under the sun wrong with the chassis. Okay, before we get back into the chassis resurrection, we have a thank you in order here. This is a box that was sent to me by Mr. Evans, who has sent me some parts that will come in handy for our radio and phonograph repairs, cartridges and whatnot. Capacitors and resistors and power cords, and you can see all what we got here. And he also sent me some tapes, that a lot of these are air checks off of WSM radio out of Nashville. This one's dated July of '97. Let's see, this one's dated '96. So yeah, these will be fun to listen to, and we'll possibly use the material from some of them in some of our future videos. There's one from '98, WSM Eddie Stubbs live show, and as I'm sure most of you know, Mr. Stubbs retired some time back. And we have a couple of books here with a lot of printed information about records and 78 RPM playback and that sort of thing, so that will be helpful to me. So thank you very much for this stuff. It is very much appreciated and will definitely be put to good use. And on that note, I started to make a USPS sucks video, but there's only about 10,000 of those already on YouTube, so no need me adding another one. Just suffice it to say, they're screwing up again. I've got several media mail packages coming to me. One of them is a record, and the other one are some service manuals. I've been ordering some of the printed copies of the most often needed Supreme Publications radio diagram books. And the reason I've been doing that is because a lot of the ones you get off of the internet are not scanned very well, and they're kind of hard to read. And it's always good to have printed the original hard copies on hand, and those will cover the majority of the stuff I work on. Well, all of them's been out between almost 2 weeks and over 3 weeks. Seems like they all make it to Memphis and just sit there. And I don't care if it is media mail. Get your butts in gear and deliver the stuff. That's what you were paid to do. And taking 3 weeks to get a package from point A to point B is unexcusable. It's completely unacceptable. This morning I opened up my email like I do every morning and got one of those informed delivery digest things from the post office saying I had something that was out for delivery today. Woohoo! It showed up finally. No, seriously, I didn't get that excited. I've learned with that to manually run the tracking number through to see, because a lot of times they'll tell you it's out for delivery when in fact it's nowhere even close to your location, and that was the case this time. It was a record I ordered off of Discogs and punched in the tracking number and got the standard "in transit, arriving late." So who knows when it'll show up. Now, you know, if something's not out for delivery, then quit sending me emails saying that it is. I know a friend of mine, a record he ordered has been lost. I think we're going on over a month now. And he filed a lost package claim, and they closed his claim because he was unable to tell them such things as what color the package is, what size the package is, what shape the package is. Well, how in the devil is he supposed to know that? He didn't send the package. I mean, it's what a tracking number's for, to find the darn thing. But really what that all boils down to is they don't care. They don't want to look for the package, so they'll just come up with any excuse they can to get out of looking for the package, and that's that. Alright, now we'll get the Philco chassis down on my workbench that looks like a tornado ran over it, and see if we can get it to play. As far as the post office inefficiency, I've heard that some people say it's all DeJoy's fault. You know, that was the new guy that Trump put in. Some people say that he intentionally slowed the mail down to hinder the voting process. We know that he's taken sort machines apart and closed down sorting facilities. We know that's happened. There's also been talk of lazy, careless post office workers. I don't really know. I don't really care. All I know is the post office is lacking and they need to get their butts in gear. Frankly, I think it's a combination of all of the above that's the reason things are the way they are, but you know, what do I know? All I know is whenever I have something sent to me, I expect to receive it in a timely fashion, not have it sitting in a damn sort facility languishing away for days or weeks. Heck, they could have attached the package to a turtle, and the turtle could have brought it from Memphis to Mississippi quicker than what they're doing. Okay, I was looking closer at this, and what's left of this Bakelite block was the original across the line capacitors, and it appears that Bakelite block exploded. In fact, you can see some remnants of black soot here on the chassis. So I figure either those caps shorted and let the magic smoke out, or either lightning hit this thing and then somebody hacked these in, which we're about to remove because I'm sure they're leaky too, and we don't need them blowing up with my head right over the bottom of the chassis. As far as the volume control, I was able to, with the help of some vice grips, to turn it on and turn it wide open, so that's where we left it. This band switch, forget it, it's not moving, but I think all it does is shorts out a portion of the secondary winding on the antenna transformer to get the police band, so that won't be any problem to disable if we have to. The power cord, I snipped that off. It had about 2 or 3 different cords spliced onto it over the years, so we'll put something on there that's not falling apart and crumbling. Yeah, the post office has no problem delivering this kind of crap. Best offer in your mailbox, really. See who it's... Franklin Financial. Yeah, we know what that's about. They want to loan me $987.28 at 68% interest. Well, that'll get deposited right into the shredder. But the stuff they ought to be giving priority to, like packages and such, they dilly-dally around with. But this crap, oh, they get right on the ball with delivering it. Could you use up to $15,000 as soon as today? Well, sure I could, as long as I don't have to pay it back, but I doubt that's the case. Yeah, usually these kind of things have a check attached to them with a warning on it. If you deposit or cash this check, then we will stick it to you left, right, backwards, and forwards. Okay, we have an uncompromised power cord slapped on here. Now let me emphasize that the techniques used in the resurrection of this radio chassis are attempted resurrection. Will not be up to par with the techniques that we would normally use on a radio that we're serious about. You know, if this was a serious repair, we wouldn't be splicing on our power cord to ends of existing wire inside of the chassis and using electrical tape for an insulator, but that's the way we're doing it today. Alright, I have the rectifier tube removed to keep any high voltage from coming up. I checked the continuity of the off-on switch. I have continuity, and we're going to apply power at 0 volts and then bring it up slowly and see what our transformer is putting out. I'm not worried about these line filter capacitors. They won't keep the radio from playing. There may be some modulation hum present, but they won't keep the radio from playing. Okay, I'm applying about 40 volts AC input. Current draw looks good. Getting about 135 volts from one side of the high voltage winding to ground, and about 135 volts from the other side of the high voltage winding to ground. So that looks really good. That's fine. And I see glowage in the other tube, so that tells me they're getting filament voltage. And we're at about 65 volts AC input now and virtually no current draw, so that's excellent. Okay, we're at full 120 volt line and we're reading about 368 volts from each end of the high voltage winding to ground, so that's good. This is a stout transformer and virtually no current draw to speak of, so that's excellent. Now we'll put the rectifier tube in, take the voltage back down to 0 and gradually bring it up and see what takes. Now the rectifier tube is in, and before we apply power I want to check the resistance between the cathode of the rectifier and ground here. And as you can see, we're going up to 20,000 ohms and rising. That's the electrolytic filter capacitors charging. Now that don't mean that a short won't develop when this thing is banged with voltage. It just means there's not a short present right now as far as the ohm meter sees it. So we'll now set our meter to measure DC volts. We now have our meter attached to the cathode of the rectifier tube, and we're inputting about 50 volts AC into the radio, and we'll just let it warm up and see what happens. Okay, we're not getting anything. I'm at about 60 volts AC input, and this has been on a good while now, and we're basically getting nothing. The rectifier tube is cool as a cucumber. So this might be another one of those cases where a cap or whatever shorted and took out the rectifier tube, and that's when the radio got shoved to the barn. Okay, the filament of this rectifier checks okay, but if you look right here you can see where it arced inside the tube. So this is a 5Y4, and I'm going to just plug in a couple of solid state 1N4007 diodes. But we're going to have to be careful doing that because these diodes are way more efficient than that tube is, which means the B+ will be considerably higher. So we'll have to bring this up very carefully and probably run it at reduced line voltage during this resurrection attempt. Okay, we have our diodes hacked into place. We're ready to measure DC voltage again, and the meter is connected. We're going to start us out at 0 volts AC input and bring it up slowly and see what happens. Yeah, we already have 20 volts there with less than 10 volts AC input, so I won't waste camera footage on the slow bring up of this, but I will let you know when something noteworthy takes place. You can see this B+ voltage creeping up. That's the capacitors reforming. Or should I clarify, the electrolytic filter capacitors reforming. And we'll just let it do that for a little while and then bring it up a little more. We're at 10 volts AC input, and that's not nearly enough voltage for the tubes to heat up and start conducting. So this is strictly power supply filter capacitors reforming and the voltage slowly climbing. Okay, we're at 76 volts B+ now with about 30 volts AC input, and this tacked in capacitor is getting a little warm to the touch. So we might want to get that out of there, because just like with the line bypass bombs, that one could decide to let go and could be dangerous to my well-being. You can see it's crusty on the end where something has already leaked out of it. Not sure who made this. Type PRS, 8 microfarad, 450 volts. 102 is the EI8 code. I'll have to look that up. And 32nd week of 65. And whoever worked on this was a bit of a slob. They didn't even bother to disconnect the old can. They just plopped a another electrolytic across it, which is a no-no, because if the old capacitor shorts, then you know it's Katie bar the door then. Okay, looked around in my junk box and found a 10 microfarad 450 volt cap that's RCA branded, likely something that was cut out of a 1970s RCA TV. We're running about 70 volts AC input, got about 200 volts B+, and our audio section is working, although somewhat weakly, but at least it is passing a signal. So that tells us our voice coil, our audio output transformer, and our speaker field coil are all in good shape. But we get nothing when we tune across the tuning dial, and I have the antenna connected. And looking at our plate and screen voltages on the 6F6, 100 and come on, stay on there. 99 volts, that's low. And 109 volts on the screen. Alright, the control grid, 2 volts. So we got a leaky coupling capacitor there. Alright, with the 6F6 removed, I have 212 volts on the cathode of the rectifier. And then on the plate and screen pins, 124 volts and 123 volts. That's low, even with the tube removed, that's low. That voltage should be somewhere up close to what the B+ voltage is coming off of the cathode of the rectifier. Okay, I snipped those other two sections of capacitors out of that's contained in this can. I snipped them out of circuit, and that brought our voltage up. Alright, with the tube out of the socket, that's 248 on the plate and 248 on the screen. That's good. And what do we have on the control grid with no 60 volts on the control grid with no tube to load it down. So that capacitor, that grid coupling capacitor, is very, very, very leaky. Yeah, we need to change out those two electrolytics that we snipped out. Now, as you can tell, I did not take this capacitor block out to restuff it. Like I've already said, this is not gonna be up to par with what we would do on a restoration. So I just simply disabled the capacitor in the inside of the block here and found an old cap out of my junk box and stuck it in there. Okay, here's our filter capacitors, very crudely tacked in place. Again, some ones I found in a box of junk somewhere. And our audio is considerably louder, but unfortunately we have no reception. Okay, there we go. Not very loud, but with the outside antenna, we're getting WMER 1390.
Under that, if the price is under that, that's the principle of what you put in.
So I feel like what happened to this radio is the filter caps failed and popped this rectifier tube, and that's when somebody said, that's enough, I'm done with it, and they threw it out in the barn and forgot about it. Probably intended to throw it away, but just never got around to doing it. Okay, so just to recap, the 5Y4 was blown, most likely because of leaky electrolytic capacitors here. We first replaced this 8 microfarad input filter that someone had already replaced by simply tacking it in across the old filter, which is a no-no, and I've already explained why. In case the old filter shorts, then that could cause problems. Well, after we replaced that capacitor, that brought our B plus at this point to a higher voltage, but our plate and screen voltages on the audio output tube were low, and that's because on this particular set they don't take those voltages off of the first filter capacitor. They take them off of the second filter capacitor here, which is part of the original 3-section can, and that section was also leaky. We replaced that, and that got our voltages back up. And then, of course, this 10 microfarad section is also a part of that can. That's part of the bias filter, and we replaced that. And then we also replaced this 0.015 microfarad plate of the 6Q7 to control grid of the 6F6 coupling capacitor. Its purpose is to block DC and to keep any DC voltages off of the control grid of the 6F6. If any DC voltage were present there, that's going to cause the 6F6 to conduct hard on, and that's going to cause way too much current to be drawn through the tube and the audio output transformer, which will lead to the premature demise of such parts. So we went ahead and replaced that. Here the line to chassis capacitors here, as you can see, there's two of them, one connected from each side of the line to the chassis, and those capacitors are located before the power switch, which means as long as the radio is plugged in, those capacitors are seeing juice. In other words, they're active. Now somebody replaced them with a 0.06 microfarad capacitor, and that's really not a good idea, because using that high of capacitor will allow enough current to flow through to the chassis to possibly create a lethal situation if someone was to touch the chassis and then touch something else with a path to ground. But a 0.015 microfarad generally won't allow that much current to flow through. Yes, you can still get a shock, but it generally won't be lethal, and that's the reason why you don't use capacitors any bigger for this application. And of course, if those capacitors are out of the circuit, then that can cause modulation hum, which is hum that can be heard only when you tune to a signal. Now we will replace those with something else before I'm done with this, but right now let's try to get the performance of this radio a bit better. And like I told you, with using solid state rectifiers with no dropping resistor, I'm having to run this at lower AC input voltage to get the B plus voltage that the schematic calls for, and they want us to see 310 volts on the cathode of the rectifier, and I'm running 320 volts. That's not too bad out of whack. I want to see 220 volts on the plate of the 6F6. 230, that makes sense, seeing as how we have.
And let me tell you, I'm a car guy, and getting
now we have 10 volts B plus higher than normal. Alright, I want to check the voltages on the 688 oscillator and mixer tube. Since our audio section is very stout, and we obviously have front end problems here, and it appears to be getting weaker and weaker. Alright, let's look. The mixer plate looks like 225 according to the schematic. We're reading about 250, that's high. And the oscillator plate is reading 225. What do they say on the schematic? That looks like 165, so that voltage is a good bit high. Now when I see voltages on a tube that's a good bit higher than what's specified when we have the correct B plus, then that usually indicates that we have a weak tube. Yeah, this thing's fading into oblivion. There's something else I see that's been replaced. A disc capacitor across that resistor. What is that? Is that red or orange? Can't hardly tell. Okay, changing that tube didn't help any. However, I noticed our AVC voltage is negative 0.44, and it does not change as I change stations. Now that could what that does, that controls the gain of the tubes, the converter and IF amplifier tubes. If that AVC circuit is not working right, and we're not getting a whole lot, and it's not turning those tubes on as hard as they need to be turned on, and yes, our B+ voltage with those tubes would be higher than normal. Well, it didn't help our performance that much, but the voltage is changing now.
Restaurant employees with a 9mm. Continued peace there is a credit to its people.
The Government of Ireland Act came into force on the 3rd
we have negative 0.5
It brought to an end
on that
painful chapter of the relationship between Britain and Ireland, but heralded another.
On WMER.
As far as Apple's defense,
but negative 0.2 on a weaker station.
Ben Gilbert is with business.
Like I said, don't want to really use my dwindling new stock of capacitors on this, so I found an old capacitor in my junk box that we're going to use for that. It's not in great shape, but you know, it seems to be for the low voltage it's going to be applied to it. It won't be that bad. Alright, I'm tweaking the IF transformers, and that's waking it up a little bit. And now we're getting WDIA, that's good. WSM.
Hypocrisy all day.
Okay, I've got it about as good as it's going to get.
For everything?
These tremors on the tuning condenser are rusted. I can't even turn them. And the ones in these IF transformers are not in too good a shape and are very touchy. Could it be made better? Yes, but as crusty as this is, and it's probably going to end up being used for parts, I'm not going to worry about it. It's as good as it's going to get.
Whatever that change is, whoever came up there needs to be fired.
But considering what this radio has been through, I think it's doing pretty good to have done no more to it than we did.
Right, trying to figure it out.